I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. Before we jump into our show tonight, we want to acknowledge the video that you've probably seen. It's the beating of Tyree Nichols in Memphis, Tennessee. It was released late today. 5 police officers are charged with his murder after he died days after his brutal arrest. The video is shocking and deeply disturbing. I wanted to acknowledge that important story, even though we won't be covering it in our show tonight. We will have more on the story on KGW News at 6:30. We'll have the latest out of Memphis, plus a live report where a rally is planned here in Portland. Now, on to our show. It's the end of the work week for many. Let's talk about work, specifically remote work. Many of us are called back to the office now that the pandemic is mostly over, but not everyone's back. In fact, there are thousands of state workers still working from home and hundreds even living in different states, like Texas and Arizona. And guess who pays to bring those workers back for meetings in Oregon? Oh, yes, you do. And that is tonight's big story. When the pandemic began, many of us went home and, if we could, kept working. Some of us discovered we were even more productive at home without all the wasted time of meetings and things that we didn't need to be at and distractions at the office. And also avoiding the commute, well, that was a special treat. But now the fun times are ending for many. Earlier this month, the Wall Street Journal featured a front-page story. The more bosses are ordering staff back to the office, telling workers they should use an existing hybrid schedule or come to the office on more days in 2023. Which is why we found it interesting that the state of Oregon is not changing its pandemic-era policies for remote work for state employees. And yes, that policy does allow agencies to use taxpayer money to bring workers back from the state they're living in to attend meetings or trainings in Oregon. We'll have more on that in a little bit. According to the Oregon Department of Administrative Services, 7,691 state employees work full-time away from the office, but in the state of Oregon. So that might be someone working from home, for example, in the Portland area, but working for a state agency in Salem. But wait, there is much more. Another 494 work full-time away from the office, and they don't live anywhere close to Oregon. All right, some actually live relatively close, in Southwest Washington or Idaho, for example, but a whole bunch live in states a lot farther away. Granted, they are a small percentage of the roughly 40,000 state employees in Oregon, but those numbers, they're not nothing. As I drilled down, I found that some of the biggest agencies had the biggest number of remote workers. Probably logical. The Department of Human Services, for example, has 2,446 people working remotely in Oregon and another 157 working in other states. The Oregon Health Authority has 1,281 workers who are remote and in Oregon, and another 99 who live in other states but work full-time for the state of Oregon. Now, I asked the state for a list of all workers who live in a state outside of Oregon. There are some in Washington, about 176, so let's not count them. That leaves more than 300 full-time workers in states that include Minnesota, Michigan, California, Arizona, North Carolina, Tennessee, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Texas, Arkansas, Utah, Mississippi, New Mexico, South Carolina, Nevada, Maine, New York, Connecticut, North Dakota, Wisconsin, and I've probably missed a few. The job titles range from information specialist to policy analyst to office specialist and others. And, you know, just from the sound of that, maybe they can be done from anywhere. But I also did find one title for corrections officer, and that person's living in Texas, so not exactly sure what's up with that one. I asked the Oregon Department of Human Services how much money they've spent bringing people back from out of state for meetings. It totaled around $4,000 for the first 9 months of last year. Now, I know that's pocket change when you think about the budget of that agency, and it's even less when you think about the entire state budget. But still, your tax money is paying to bring someone back to Oregon who has chosen to live in a different state. The Oregon Department of Administrative Services issued a statement saying it's similar to when we cover the cost of employees to attend trainings or conferences out of state, or when we cover the cost of employees who are duty stationed elsewhere in the state and they are asked to travel to a central workplace. All right. I was hoping to get someone from the state to do an on-camera interview to explain why taxpayers should be footing the bill for those folks. The governor's office didn't even respond to my email, and the Department of Administrative Services said sorry, they had no one available. But I was able to get an interview a few weeks ago with the Oregon State Treasurer, Tobias Reed. He's a Democrat, and as an elected official, he can set his own policies, and he has. He's all for remote work flexibility, but not for paying to bring employees back for meetings.
We still believe that there are advantages to be gained by being flexible, that we can hire talent in more places. I still believe that we are better off when we come together, when we can be creative and collaborative, and I still believe that employers get to determine the terms of employment when a person comes to work and how they do that work, and I still believe we don't pay for people to commute. It's their right to choose where they want to live, and our expectation that they'll get themselves to work.
So if somebody is working in Alabama and wants to work living in Alabama, wants to work for the Treasury, you're not going to pay to fly them in for regular meetings?
No.
Because some state agencies are.
I'm treasurer. I get to exercise my responsibility to the Treasury, and the leadership that I want to provide here is based on that recognition that flexibility is smart, but we work for Oregonians, not the other way around, and we're going to keep that in mind as we make that, our efforts to balance those competing concerns. But no, I don't think that someone, as they exercise their right to choose where they live, the beneficiaries of our funds should not pay for their commutes.
But not everyone agrees with Mr. Reed, who, by the way, does have remote workers in other states. If we don't count people living in Washington state, he has 10. So what's the justification for the rest of state government? The Department of Administrative Services issued this statement that reads in part, "As we come out of the pandemic, our top priority remains ensuring that Oregonians are well served. When this can be accomplished and when the business needs of the agency can be met, we are finding that continuing to offer remote work as an option is an important tool for recruitment and retention, especially as many private and public sector employers have moved rapidly in this direction." Well, okay, but the state might want to take another look at the headlines recently, because the times, as they say, they are a-changing. NBC reports that Disney recently told employees they'd have to spend 4 days on site each week. The CEO, Bob Iger, wrote, "Nothing can replace the ability to connect, observe, and create with peers that comes from physically being together." It's one of several national companies which have increased their in-person requirements. Finally, some Oregon lawmakers are frowning on the idea of taxpayer money being used to bring Oregon workers back from other states for meetings. I'm told a bill that has at least some bipartisan support will be introduced into the latest legislative session on Monday. That's a good thing, in my opinion. We'll see how it goes. In the meantime, as always, we wonder what you think of the remote work policy. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Send us your thoughts. The email is thestory@kgw.com, or you can call our phone number and leave a message, 503-226-5090. I look forward to hearing from you. Speaking of Oregon lawmakers, they are also thinking about environmental legislation down there in Salem and how they can cut greenhouse gases from buildings. Environmental reporter Cale Williams has our story.
They don't have tailpipes or gas tanks, but Oregon's buildings are responsible for a big chunk of the state's carbon emissions.
Well, we know that buildings represent about 40% of the energy consumed in the state, so that's a significant piece.
That's Representative Pam Marsh, chair of the House Committee on Climate, Energy, and the Environment. Marsh and Senate Majority Leader Kate Lieber are crafting a package of bills aiming to reduce emissions from Oregon's buildings. But given the record-breaking heat waves and wildfires of the last few years, they're looking to make Oregon's buildings more resilient, too.
When I moved to Oregon in 1995, no one had an air conditioner because we didn't really need an air conditioner. And now it's a health hazard not to have an air conditioner.
The package of bills will have four main priorities, with heat pumps near the top of the list. Heat pumps are electric systems that can replace traditional furnaces. But unlike your old furnace, heat pumps can heat and cool your home. The laws would offset some of the upfront costs of getting the systems installed, which can be a pricey endeavor.
We've had these heat events where people have died, and we now understand that changing conditions really mean that heating and cooling are essentials.
They're also looking to create new energy efficiency regulations for large commercial buildings and to get fossil fuels out of state-run facilities. But perhaps the most important part of the package would be a new navigation system. Last year's Inflation Reduction Act included $369 billion to help fight climate change. But getting to that money is far from simple. So Marsh and Lieber hope to create a navigation system that will ensure Oregonians take full advantage of the tax credits, rebates, and incentives available to them.
Setting up navigation systems and making sure that people understand what money is available to them and how to get it, that's a high priority.
Now, all of that is expected to cost between $20 and $40 million, which would likely come from the state's general fund. We won't know an exact price tag until the language of the bills are released in coming weeks. But Lieber said the payoff in the long run would be worth it.
If it costs us a little more money in order to make sure that we are fighting climate change, that in the end will cost us less because we've reduced our greenhouse gas emissions, that's a plus.
Cale Williams, KGW News.
Thank you, Cale. You know, it wasn't that long ago that some, possibly many, in the National Republican Party were generally known for denying climate change even exists. Well, that's starting to change, at least for some of them. Those Republican lawmakers are not only recognizing climate change and its impacts on their area, but they're starting to form plans to address it. In 2021, Representative John Curtis from Utah founded the Conservative Climate Caucus in Congress. The group works to try and tackle climate change on their own conservative way. Curtis is from Utah. The outdoors and natural resources are a big deal there, of course, just like they are here in the Northwest. But the caucus has Republican members from all over the country. Last year, the group had 64 members. Now it's up to 73 members. Both of Oregon's 2 Republican members of Congress are part of that caucus, Cliff Bentz, who represents Eastern Oregon, and Oregon's newest Republican, Lori Chavez DeRemer, who represents Central Oregon, and joined the caucus this week. We talked with her about that today.
Well, I think the bigger thing that we heard on the campaign trail was how important our natural resources are in the state of Oregon. And we always want to keep a close eye on how important that is. We're a natural resource state with the timber industry. There's been concerns with agriculture and water and farming as we move through. And I just, as a new representative for Oregon's 5th District, this is an important issue to everybody. And I thought it was important to join this caucus to address, the free market and how we move through the process. And, as conservatives, I used to say on the trail, it's because we conserve and we want to make sure that we take care of our beautiful state. So this is a perfect caucus for me to be on and bring those values.
It makes a lot of sense for Republican leaders, especially in a place like Oregon, to embrace climate change and work to solve it. Natural resources and the jobs they create are heavily impacted by the climate. Think about wildfires and the timber industry, water shortages and farmers, or the way that warming oceans affect fishing jobs. Many of those jobs are located in areas led by Republicans. Chavez DeRemer says people in those industries told her they wanted one big thing.
A seat at the table. Often when we talk about natural resources, they want a voice. And on the conservative side of that, the free market, we want to address the free market and how do we work together without mandates from the federal government or state government. And so having a seat at the table, that's what they asked for.
Chavez DeRemer says the caucus is focused more on working with leaders in the natural resource industry and the private sector on what they need, not on making sweeping mandates that affect everyone.
Working with the private sector is how we approach it. They're on the ground every single day. They live it in their communities. It's their, maybe generational family farming or ranching or grazing. They're the best stewards of the land, and they come to us and let us know what works, what doesn't work, and how do we preserve these natural resources. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican, caring about the environment is important.
Now, one of the main goals of the caucus is to find ways to support new innovations in energy production. Representative Curtis told NPR last fall that his group is not interested in demonizing fossil fuels and that there's a place for fossil fuels in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. He says he'd like to focus more on innovations that allow those fuels to run more cleanly rather than get rid of them altogether. But he says they're also supportive of renewable energy in addition to fossil fuels, not instead of it. He said today about Chavez DeRemer, Lori knows just as many in the West do the importance of an all-of-the-above energy approach to provide constituents, especially in rural areas, the cleanest, least expensive energy. We're going to keep an eye on what they come up with, but we want to hear from you on this, as we always do, especially if you work in the natural resource industry. Shoot us a message, will you? Tell us how climate change affects your life and what kind of changes you want from lawmakers. We'll bring those concerns up the next time we interview them. You can send an email to thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090.
A big project is underway that could change the game when it comes to building affordable housing.
These houses will be extremely high quality. Costs will be reasonable. Mass production will reduce that cost even further.
It uses mass timber. It's inexpensive, strong, and good for the environment. We'll have the details on the project when The Story returns.
Welcome back. Keep sending your questions and comments to us. We see them coming in. A lot of you folks fired up about that remote workforce issue. Oregon's new governor has a bold goal. She wants to add 36,000 units of new housing a year to tackle the state's housing crisis. Today, Governor Tina Kotek took a look at some new modular homes being developed that could help with that plan. Tim Gordon has our story.
Inside a warehouse at the Port of Portland's Terminal 2 is the result of 6 weeks construction work.
We can do this, and we can do this very, very quickly.
Prototype modular homes made in part with Oregon mass timber, a high-tech strong laminate. Thus the name of the project, Mass Casitas. Affordable housing group Hacienda Community Development Corp is leading the project to make this part of the housing crisis solution.
These houses will be extremely high quality. Costs will be reasonable. Mass production will reduce that cost even further.
Showing off the homes under construction brought out a crowd, including Oregon Governor Tina Kotek and Oregon U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley. They toured the homes that are possible thanks to $5 million in startup money from the Oregon legislature.
It's exciting because this is a seed. This is a seed being planted with the vision of growing a whole forest of affordable homes in our state.
If the project proves successful, these homes could be mass produced in Oregon with help from a $41 million federal grant to develop and expand Oregon's emerging mass timber industry.
And I couldn't be more thrilled by these prototypes.
And that fits right into the goal from Oregon's new governor to build 36,000 new units of housing in the state annually. We talked to her off podium about that.
You know, what I love about it is it's a homegrown product, mass timber out of, in this case, Southern Oregon, to do modular, which allows us to be more efficient, quicker, to put homes on the ground.
The governor has other goals for ending homelessness and keeping people housed.
Right now, it's more money for outreach, more money for shelters.
She just announced specifics of a $130 million plan for that. There is more to come on housing solutions, including these modular homes as a very strong possibility.
And these are amazingly designed homes. They are warm, they are friendly, they don't feel like a box, and this is going to change what we can do in communities around the state.
Including in Otis, Oregon, that suffered huge losses from 2020's Echo Mountain fire. Barb and Scott Benedict lost their home and everything else in that fire. They will be gifted one of the Casita prototypes being built right now. What's it going to mean for you?
Oh, after 2.5 years in a 29-foot travel trailer, we're going to have so much room, and it's amazing to us. It's just fantastic.
The governor thinks these could be really great for disaster relief and also as a piece of the solution of the overall housing crisis. No word yet on what these are going to end up costing. We should know more after they've been out and tested for the next year in the climates of Oregon. Tim Gordon, KGW News.
Thanks, Tim. Students in Oregon's public schools have been struggling for a long time. It was happening before the pandemic, but COVID made everything worse. Now students are dealing with all the same things the rest of us are: violence, homelessness, mental health problems. Up next, what school administrators say they need. We talk a lot about the serious issues facing our area right now. In the last few years, on top of the pandemic, we've seen a rise in gun violence and hate crimes, along with homelessness and climate change and other economic concerns. It's a lot to deal with as an adult, but we know the kids in our area are not immune to the same challenges. In the last year, as kids return to school, teachers and parents have seen fighting, behavioral issues, mental health concerns, all in the classroom and at home. And there have been a series of shootings near schools in Portland in recent months. We wanted to know how school districts are working to address the problems, so we asked Portland Public School Superintendent Guadalupe Guillermo and Salem Keizer Public School Superintendent Christy Perry to join us for Straight Talk this week.
The pandemic has amplified disparities, academically, certainly, but what we're observing are all the readiness to learn challenges. And so our students have not, and their families have not been immune from the trauma and instability of homelessness and addiction and gun violence and mental behavioral health. And so as public school educators and school systems, how do we support our students to be able to support their thriving and their outcomes? So those are the challenges, and they're real, and we're facing them every day.
It isn't fair for our educators who were equipped to be teachers of reading and writing and math, and maybe not mental health in this way. We have a social worker in every middle school, every high school. We spend over $38 million in social emotional learning supports, and it's not enough. So what you can see is we've got to have community-based solutions that really step in and intervene with these kids.
I know in Portland Public, you're facing some of the same issues. We've covered this a lot, but can you talk more specifically about the city?
Sure. Of course, we want our students, our educators, to be able to learn and work in a positive learning environment. We too have spent millions on social workers, mental behavioral health. We're excited about our new partnership with U of O and the Ballmer Institute. But inevitably, the challenges that our broader community are facing at some point are going to enter the schoolhouse, or incidents are going to occur on the steps of our campuses, and we have to contend with those. So I think what my colleague Christy is describing is we've got to have a collective approach. We're not a social service agency, and yet we are dealing with a lot of those readiness to learn challenges. So support with mental behavioral health and the other traumas like drug addiction and gun violence that are impacting our community. We need collective solutions, and school systems are prepared to step up and do their part. We're educators, and so we really need our city and county leaders and statewide leaders to sort of kind of make sure that we have the capacity as a community to address these issues.
It is an important conversation. You can watch the rest of it and also hear what they say is going right in the schools. There are some things going well. That's tonight at 7 o'clock right here on KGW or on our KGW YouTube channel or KGW Plus. All right, keep sending your questions and comments to thestory@kgw.com. We're going to wrap things up right after this. We love to read through your comments in the commercials as you're sending them in. We got a couple interesting ones on the remote work issue. Here's one from Sarah. Hey, Pat, I love Tobias Reed's comment that he won't pay for people to commute from out of state to come to meetings. It's just like commuting by driving. Employers don't pay for workers to commute by car, so why should they pay for them to commute by plane? Well, thank you very much for that, Sarah. Here's another one from John who says, great idea. Take tax dollars from hardworking Oregonians and export them to other states because we are so backward here that it's not possible to find capable government workers within the state. Pat, you continue to bring stories to the show that just rile me up. Well, we're here to make you think, John. Thanks to you and for everybody else who's been sending comments. Keep them coming in, even if you're not watching them live. We love to see what you have to say. In the meantime, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, the story, our story, well, that never ends. I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you Monday.
This is KGW News.